Hello. Hey. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Monzo. This is our May open office. We have these every month. If you've been before, hello again. If this is your first time, thanks for coming. Thanks for braving the horrible, horrible weather and bank holiday hangovers. Today, we will be joined by Samantha Davies, our user research lead, who will be telling you all about how we use user research here at Monzo. I have to do the boring housekeeping stuff, which is toilets for men are here and women down the corridor and on the right. Help yourself to food if you haven't already. Drinks in the fridge. It is very hot, so stay hydrated. We put the aircon on, and I will personally be fanning people who are very hot. No, I'm not going to do that. Anything else I should mention? We're doing a Q&A afterwards, so save your questions to the end, but enjoy. I'll hand over to Samantha.
Hello, everyone. It's my first one of these, so please be nice. Apparently, the microphone doesn't work very well, so if you can't hear me, just wave at me, and then I will wave at Ben, who will then fix it for me. So thank you. Thanks for being here. I don't know how many of you are here just for the free food, but I think that'd be me. Yeah, there we go. Cool. So look, today I'm going to talk a bit about this. I wrote a blog post a few months ago. I don't know if anyone's read it. No, yes. So there won't be any repetition on that, or there will be a little bit. But I'll be going into a little bit more detail. So I'm a user research lead. I've been at Monzo about 6 months, and I sit in the design team for anyone who is familiar with them or has been to any other talks anyone's given. This is going to work. Moment of truth. Yay! Okay, great. So let's get started. So what is user research, right? So before I go and explain it, I'm really curious to see from the audience, who here has either worked with a user researcher or is a user researcher? Can I get a show of hands? Wow, a pretty good number. Okay, who has not necessarily worked with a user researcher but knows what it is or works in a design or a tech-related role? Can I get hands up? Yeah, okay, pretty much everyone else. That's pretty good. So by the end of this, I'm hoping that you'll get a bit more of a sense of what user research is about, my role, what I do, and then why user research is a thing and why it's kind of important. Right? Hopefully, some of you will know that, but not everyone. So I get asked this question quite a lot, and I think this is a question that tends to go around the houses. Right? What is good design, and what does good design look like, and what does it mean? Design is not the same thing as art, because art is all about an expression. Good design for me is about designing a solution and something that people want to use that addresses needs or problems that someone might have, right? So arguably, if we're trying to understand what makes good design, and if we're trying to create a good design, we need to understand those needs that people have and the context in which they have them, right? But we as humans, we're deeply flawed. We have lots of different cognitive biases, heuristics, and logical fallacies in the way that we look at the world, right? So I know I've just thrown some big terms at you. We'll go and sort of explore what those actually mean. Basically, what that means is the way we look at the world is completely through our own eyes, obviously, physically, but also through our own frame of the way that we interpret things. So what makes good design difficult is needing to build up a sense of empathy. Empathy isn't something that everyone is necessarily born with. The part of our brain that is responsible for empathy doesn't fully develop until we're 25 years old. So developing that skill is really important for us to be able to make good design. So let's use an example. Let's say instead of designing digital products and services, we were designing a bicycle. Okay, if I wanted to design a bike for myself, for example, I would fix the frame of the height, I'd fix the frame of the handlebars to a certain level, I'd make it nice and comfortable because, you know, that's just me. I probably wouldn't use it for commuting because I'm terrified of the London roads. So I'd use it for weekends, pootling about, and I'd probably have it in black because I like the colour. Right, you're probably looking at this and thinking, well, I don't like this bike. That's no good for me, that's no good for what I want to do. Right? You're probably looking at it already and picking holes in the design. But what if we're designing a bike for this person? What do they need to do with a bike? Why are they using it? By the way, I should say, I've completely stolen the bike example from one of my old bosses, so Chad, if you're here somewhere or watching, thank you. What about this person? Right? What about their needs? Why are they using a bike? Or this person? Or this one? Is it even a bike anymore, really? But does it matter? Or this person? Right? So every single person, as we can see, is still a bike, but the bike is completely different. Right? So arguably, for one person, it might be about fitness. For another, it's about fun. For another, it's about utility. For another one, it might be about price or convenience. If we try and sell one type of bike to another person, they're not going to find any use out of it, right? They're not going to be able to use it. So to be able to make good design, we have to understand these three things. We need to understand people's goals, their needs, and their context. So then you might be wondering, right, well, how do we go about that? Right, there's lots of different ways. And a lot of you have probably used data to help inform designs. You'll look at a conversion funnel, for example, and you'll see that people are dropping off at a certain point. Or maybe you've run a survey and you've gotten back some information from people about what they like, what they don't, what they're finding useful, what they're not. And that stuff is kind of useful, but it doesn't really tell you the why. Why are people dropping off at this certain point? Why is it that they're going about using something in a certain way? And that's what qualitative does. It gives us the why. It gives us that richer picture that we'd otherwise be missing out. It helps us understand what was their situation around their goal. And as much as possible, we always want to focus on behaviors rather than opinions. And data doesn't give us any of that, right? It gives us, again, the what. Qual will give us some of the opinions. But again, getting into the why and really understanding it, where we get to see it rather than them telling us, is the important part. So user research, what's it about? So user research is about helping us make sure that we design the right bike for the right person. But it's also about reminding us that sometimes it's not actually about the bike. It's about what they're trying to do with the bike. Fundamentally, user research is about reducing uncertainty about decisions we're having to make in our day-to-day and in product decisions, right? Around designs and around the direction that we want to go in, based on the goals, the needs, and the context. I'm going to keep repeating those things over and over again for our users. Without user research, the way I see it is we're basically throwing spaghetti at a wall and seeing what sticks, but in a really expensive way. Right? If we keep doing it, yeah, eventually something will stick. But actually, if we find out before how we can do it, we don't need to use that approach necessarily. Sometimes we do, but not quite as much maybe. We're throwing less spaghetti at the wall. But the main challenge with qualitative research is fundamentally it involves a study of people. And as I mentioned before, people are very flawed. Right? The way that we look at the world is very subjective. We're champions in self-delusion, every single one of us, because it's what keeps us sane. We try and maintain a view of the world that keeps us happy and that fits in with what we believe in our belief system. It protects our ego. So what I was hoping to do is, before I go in to talk about what user research at Monzo looks like, was to talk about some of those, a little introduction to the mind, as it were, to sort of get you started and make you understand maybe why user research is not always as easy as it looks from the outside. So I'll give you 30 seconds to have a little read of this slide. Can everyone at the back read it, or should I read it out loud? Yeah, you can read it. Okay, so anyone know what this is called? You can shout. Yeah, bingo, confirmation bias. Whee! So for anyone who's not heard of this, as humans, we love to make opinions based on just a few facts and then make everything else that we see fit to that view of the world. We love going, aha, I knew it all along. Like, it just makes us feel really, really good. It makes us feel strong. It makes us feel powerful. It makes us feel like we're right. Again, it protects our ego. So hopefully you'll have heard of this quite a lot when it came out during the fake news epidemic in the wake of the presidential election, maybe, yeah. Lots of people clicking on articles without really, seeing where the source is from, because they're like, oh no, this is outrageous, and I'm outraged, but actually this confirms what I knew all along, so I'm going to continue spreading it. So it matters because when we're collecting data and we're speaking to users, we need to be really careful of our assumptions. We need to be really careful about what we're coming to a situation loaded with. And if we're going out and asking questions, making sure that we're not just trying to find information that we know already. Right? We need to try and understand our unknown unknowns, not just validate things that we think we know. And even when we're talking about assumptions, I like to think of it as illustrating. assumptions rather than validating them, because validating them implies already that that's all you're looking to do. I've only got a couple more, but I think, again, they're really relevant. So the availability heuristic basically says that you're far more likely to believe in something if you can find just one example of it. And this applies to memories, emotions, like stories, concepts, anything like that. So if you can find just one example and use that as an example to illustrate to other people, you're more likely to just keep on run with it. And you tend to believe anecdotes and individual sensational news stories are far more representative of the big picture than they actually are. So, for example, if you saw lots of articles about sharks in the news, you're much more likely to go, oh my gosh, sharks are out of control, when they might not be. Actually, it's the news really likes covering shark stories, right? By the way, sharks are friends. Secret scuba diver over here. So why does it matter? It matters because when we're collecting insights, we're much less likely to believe or remember something if we weren't there, right? So if someone else is telling us a story or someone else is telling us a piece of insight, it's much more likely to stick if we can go, oh yeah, I saw that too. So therefore, it must be true. Like, well, what about all the rest of the stories that we're not hearing and all the rest of the stories that maybe we haven't gone and discovered? Last one, this is my favorite, hindsight bias. So this one basically says that you'll often look back at things with the assumption that you have the knowledge now that you used to. So it's the cousin of the availability bias, the one that we just looked at. So if the availability bias was where you will make decisions based on the information you know, this is more about, based on the information that you find, this is more based on the information that you know. So what you're likely to do with this one is ignore basically any other information. Yeah, you're going to ignore any information or where you were before new facts that you find out more recently. So I'll give you some examples of it. So here's an image of a pug. Cute pug, right? Have you seen what's on its forehead? Doesn't that look like the Batman sign? Right, and if I flick away and come back, you can't unsee it now, can you? All right, so you can't go back to what you were. And that's the hindsight bias in action. Once you've got a piece of information, it's really hard to go back to where you were before. Here's another one. The Toblerone Mountain, you will never look at it in the same way again, I promise. There's a bear in it, right? Again, you can't see that. You're welcome. Hey. Here you go. There it is again, staring right at you. Never be able to go through duty-free the same way ever again. So why is it important? Again, as a collectors of data, when we're telling a story, it's easy to forget that other people don't have the knowledge we have. There's a really great quote by Charles Eames, the guy who designed the chairs, who says that knowledge can't be, and understanding can't be delegated. You can delegate execution of something, but knowledge and understanding, all of that, like you really have to go through it yourself. The other important point with this one is that when we are trying to get information from users, it's very hard for people to put themselves back in a past situation. So when we do user research, we try and focus on behaviors and on things that are happening straight away rather than on opinions. So this is a codex I've stolen from Wikipedia of all of the different biases, not just the hindsight one, the availability one. You can see there's a lot of them. I started manually counting them, and there were close to 200. There's tons. Obviously, I'm not going to go through all of these, or we'd be here till tomorrow. But as you can see, there's a lot. And trying to understand these, or at least having a basic understanding of them, if you're going to go and speak to people and get some feedback, is really important. But to summarize them, because I'm sure you'd like a little summary, those are the 4 main points. The first is that there's just too much information in the world. There's so much information being thrown at us all the time, so we aggressively filter. Information overload, it really sucks, right? It's just so difficult. So we don't see everything. And some of the important information, some of the information that we filter out is actually quite important. So the noise that we hear becomes signal. That's point number 1. Second point, we seek meaning. Lack of meaning is really confusing for us, so we fill in the gap, and signal becomes a story. And our search for meaning can create all these illusions. We also need to act fast, so we start making quick decisions. And the signal then becomes stories, and stories can become decisions. And then finally, we don't know what to remember. So because we don't know what to remember, we just remember the important bits. But important is different to everyone. right? So let's say you want to do some user research and you've decided that you're going to go out there, you're going to try and get some feedback maybe on a product that you decide to go ahead with, or maybe you want to understand your users better. The next big thing you need to ask yourself is how you frame what it is that you've got. Where do you place your frame? What it is that you want to learn, and what is the problem that you want to understand? If you think you know the problem already, and I hear this from a lot of people, they're like, I know the problem, I know the solution, it's fine, I can just go ahead with it. Like, check your assumptions, check your biases. Who have you spoken to? How many people have you spoken to? Who are the people that you've spoken to? Are you really sure? You might have a data point or a hunch, but that's not enough in itself, right? But regardless of where you're at, you should be really clear of what it is that you're trying to do. Are you trying to understand people, or do you already have a solution that you're wanting to test? Because whatever stage that you're at, you need to focus on doing that really clearly. And the way I look at it, and again, this is probably simplifying it massively, and you other user researchers out there, please, we can have a chat about this afterwards. I'd love to hear your opinions. But the way I see it is research questions tend to fall either into what we call explorative or evaluative buckets. So explorative buckets tend to be right at the beginning of the product lifecycle. It's wanting to understand, let's say for Monzo, a relevant example is we want to understand how people take out loans or credit, right? We might have loads of questions about the journey that they take, around who's involved, around how they make decisions, about how much to borrow or what they want to borrow for, who else is involved, how they go about it, what sources do they use to inform themselves. Those are explorative questions. Evaluative questions are much further ahead down the product design lifecycle. So again, you've got a solution and you want to see whether or not what you're designing has met the needs of those people. And there's loads of different user research methods. I'm not going to go through all of these because, again, we'll be here till tomorrow. But there's tons, right? And there's everything from ones that are very much more about observations and behaviors to what people think and say. And then you've got methods that are looking at much larger sample groups, and then ones that are looking at much smaller sample groups. But ultimately, it's not about the method that you use. It's about the objective that you're trying to meet. It's about what you're trying to learn. So when people come to me and they go, Sam, let's run a survey, or Sam, let's do some user testing, I don't say yes. Right? I go, well, what is it you're trying to learn? So talking a bit about what we do at Monzo. So one of the first things I did when I started at Monzo was wanting to establish a regular cadence of user testing. So when I arrived here, user testing was happening, but more in what we call a pop-up environment. So some of you might have been invited. I don't know if anyone came to some of the sessions that happened very early on in the beta program. Hands up if you did. Nope, okay. So essentially what the product teams and engineering teams were doing was asking people from the community to come in and to give some feedback on the designs. And while that's great because you can get some feedback very quickly and in a very lightweight manner, what's not so great about that is, firstly, the sample is self-selecting, so it's people who are wanting to come, who might not be representative of a broader demographic or behavior base. And then also having lots of different people asking questions might mean that they're not consistent or coherent in the way that they're doing so, right? So everyone can ask questions and then get a completely different understanding of the results that they're seeing. So I've set up a regular cadence of testing, and we're doing now what we call Testing Tuesdays. So on a Tuesday, not every Tuesday, but when we do have stuff to test, we'll test it in a lab environment, which is what this looks like. So this is one of the rooms, the observation room, as we call it. So everyone who's sat in here are people who are part of the project team. And then we can see here on the monitor, we're streaming from another room called the testing room, where I'll be in a room with a participant, getting them to go through what we call task-based testing. What's really great with doing the sessions synchronously, so with everyone being sort of live on the day, is it means that we can make decisions about the product really quickly, rather than research happening in a bubble and then the findings being fed back to the team later. It means that they're not, if that happens, like I've seen it done in so many places, where it just means that research, like it doesn't become part of like the DNA and the culture. Here, like everyone being brought in, everyone being part of it means that they understand what's happening immediately, and we can all talk about the results very quickly. We run the sessions on quite a tight schedule, so we'll run 5 or 6 in a day, or 6 or 7, depending on the timings. And at the end of every session, we have a quick chat around what we saw. And we also follow a very strict structure because, again, user testing for me is about illustrating assumptions. It's not about trying to find out those deeper contextual things. Right? User testing is right at the end of that cycle. So here's an example of like the deliverable that I use. So this is a page of Confluence, and at the end of a session, or during the session, actually let me start back. Before the session, I'll get in touch with with our product teams and our design teams. We'll all work together, and then we'll list out all of the assumptions that we're wanting to test from the design. And you'll notice that all of the assumptions are behavioral based. They are not opinion based, because opinions change all the time. Your opinion can change based on what you had for breakfast this morning, or based on a conversation that you had on the way to work. But behaviors tend to stay pretty consistent. So what we do is we then line them up with all the participants at the top, and then we'll go through each one. And then at the end of a session, we go through, and then we say yes or no, or maybe sometimes it's inconclusive, which is fine as well, right? So you really want to be certain of whether something is working or not. And then some notes at the end, and then the rest of my page will have additional findings and quotes and other things. And the nice thing about doing this is not only is it really lightweight, but it makes it super clear about what it is that the purpose of this tool is for. So I'll show you an example of a prototype that we tested in that round. I'm just having to pull another slide across there. So this was for Spread the Cost. So Spread the Cost is a lending feature that we're going to be releasing pretty soon. And Voko, who's one of our fantastic product designers, designed the flow. So what we do is we put this in a Marvel prototype, and we will put this onto a phone, depending on an iPhone or an Android phone, depending on what it is that the participants are used to. We hand them the phone, and then we give them the task. And we say to them, imagine I wasn't here and this and that was happening. Can you go through it? And again, I know it's not the real scenario, right? We'd much rather be with them at home when they're going through it, but at least it gives us a sense of what are some of the biggest issues that we're likely to see, and whether or not they can get through all of those assumptions that we were making. So we can flick through it really quickly. So here in this scenario, we said to them, I want you to imagine that you'd moved home recently, and you had gone to IKEA, and you'd made a big purchase, just here, and you saw this new feed item pop up, the one at the top. Do you want to, click through that and just do what you would do if you're at home and go ahead and, complete that flow, that journey, essentially. And then we take them through it. And I avoid stopping them at every page, because when you stop them at every page, you don't get them to go through the whole thing, right? So we try and get them to go through the whole thing naturally. And then afterwards, when they get to the end, we can then, that's a horrible page. We don't get to choose that one. And then at the end, we can go back and talk through the bits, right? So the nice thing with Marvel is, as you can see, it allows us to create prototypes that look pretty polished, and we can do that quite quickly. Of course, if you're needing something that's actually live, that's got some data behind it, then you'll need a build environment, so you need something that's a little bit more functional. This is very flat. They're just all flat designs that just click from one page into the next. Right, then summary. So we recently redesigned the summary tab. Xander gave a talk about this a little while ago. So we've got it on iPhone and on Android. And with summary, we knew that this was going to be a really big part of the app, right? So we really wanted to make sure we're doing this properly. When I joined late last year, most of the designs had already been done. So we wanted to get a little bit of testing done on them to make sure that we weren't missing anything big. Like, one of the biggest assumptions that we'd made before was that people would want to see their finances on a monthly cycle. And we brought in people who were freelancers, we brought in people who were getting paid on a weekly basis to see whether that model worked. And most people told us that it did, because even though their salary might be coming in, or their finances might be coming in on not a monthly cycle, their bills were coming out on a monthly cycle. So it really helps them think about everything in a monthly cycle when it comes to budgeting. However, we then decided to run a diary study before we launched the feature, because we wanted to make sure that we weren't missing anything or forgetting anything. So what we did was handpicked 14 participants. I've cut off their faces at the top because I'm not sure I can show everyone them. And we hand-selected these 14 participants to really be very different in the way that they were. So we had some people who were not very affluent. We had some people who were. We had some people who were Monzo users who were putting their salaries put in. We had some that were top-up users. We had some who were on benefits. We had some that had families. We had some that were single. We had some all across the country, right? And what we asked them to do was to use Monzo as their primary card and then to send us in an entry every day, which through WhatsApp. So it could be voice recording, it could be a video, it could be photos, it could be text entry. And then we would copy-paste their entries and put them in a Trello board. Well, I would do that along with a couple of other people from the team. And then you can see all the little tags that we put on. So the contextual insight, any feature requests, positive experience, moments of delight, bugs, anything like that came out. And this basically allowed us to see where the tool was breaking, what we needed to do better. And we can start really getting that contextual insight that we wouldn't normally get until much further down the line. Now, you might argue, like, well, why not just do this out to a beta group? The beta groups often, again, can be quite self-selecting, and this way we got to choose the participants. This also allowed us to make sure that we weren't flooding our customer operations team with lots of requests that might come in at a later date. Because if we do launch something and people don't get it or they don't like it or there's issues, they'll end up going through our customer operations team. And as we scale and as we release new features, that can become a bigger and bigger problem for the business, right? So this was one of the nice bits of insights that came out, as well as the Trello board. One of the ways that I try and share insight is as quickly as possible. So even though we had that monthly cycle that I was talking about, we had some participants essentially tell us that they think about their budgeting on a weekly cycle because it's a lot easier for them to manage. So one of the things that the team is now looking at is how they can integrate weekly budgeting into the monthly overall cycle. And again, you're probably looking at this going, well, yeah, that's really obvious, but that's your hindsight bias to play. So, and in this case, I do try and keep all the insight in one place, but I also try and feed it back as quickly as I can to the team. So we've got a Slack channel for a couple of the different products in our design team, and then I'll just pop it in there, and then we can just all start talking about it and what we're going to do about it. So trying to keep all those deliverables really lean, so we can do our research super quickly and just move on to the next thing is really important to us. And something I'm really trying to engender at Monzo. Let me just close. Sorry, I've got something down here that is in the way. Oh, one of the other things I wanted to talk about was about triangulating other sources of feedback. So another thing that we're trying to do at Monzo is to make sure that we're not missing anything from all the other rich sources of feedback that we can get. So we've got, we use Slack, and we've got a Slack integration bot thing. I'm not even, yeah, okay. Where we pull in the in-app survey, and then we also pull in all of our app reviews. So it means that anyone in the company can just sign up to the channel and see all the information live as it's coming in. Recently, we released a list of all the features that we wanted to try and get done for the next quarter, and we changed direction on the product roadmap. You might be aware of it. So that came from a big exercise that we did, looking at all these different sources, along with the community, of course, and then seeing what we could be doing that was going to be really important for our customers. So even though we might have a vision of things that we want to do that are, cool and different and fun, we also recognize that we need to make sure that we're satisfying the fundamental needs that people have got. And that's different to the wants, right? There's stuff that people want, and then there's things that they need. But some things we recognize are just so fundamental that no one would really use Monzo properly unless we address them. And that's where that came from. So before you sort of run off and decide to go and do your own research, a couple of words of warning. The first one is this, bad research is worse than no research. It can send you in the wrong direction, so you waste even more time and effort, and it can undermine really good research. So I've worked in a place, for example, where I saw some research that was done where they had asked participants in the past whether or not they liked designs. They had printed off paper versions of a website, and they'd gone, do you like this? Do you like the color? Do you like the buttons? It's completely pointless. It doesn't matter if someone likes it or not, right? So to ask the right questions in the right way is a skill, and learning how to extrapolate insights from what you're learning is also a skill. And it takes experience. This above question is a terrible one, and it's one I've seen quite a few times done, right? There's a few reasons why it's terrible. I'll go into it in just a second. But basically, it's not our job to just to ask people what they want. It's our job to understand the underlying needs and then to come up with solutions to the needs that they have. So as well as asking the right questions, which we'll go on to, a really big part is getting the right people. We sort of touched on it a little bit before, but if you talk to the wrong people, you're basically just creating an echo chamber. So you don't want to be talking to people who are just like you, right? You want to make sure that when you're doing your research, you're really thinking about the extremes. Tim Brown of IDEO talks about this in his book. So he talks about doing unfocused groups. So unfocused groups are people who really lie at the extremes of behaviors for a product that they're looking at and to try and get insight from them. So he gave an example of cooking knives, and he was looking at how they might redesign cooking knives for people in general, the general population. So they decided to do some research with children and with professional chefs to see some of the issues that they had and then some of the ways that they were using the tools. Because that way you can start getting some inspiration from them and you can start understanding what you can do to the product that you're designing, right? The next question I get a lot is how many people? So how many people? For usability tests, the rule of thumb is 5 users will get you the majority of the biggest usability problems. So here's a couple of nice graphs from Nielsen Norman Group. They're basically the granddaddies of usability. And here they plotted 83 of their consulting projects along the number of usability findings versus the number of test users. And you can see that after 5, which is about here, the line just stays pretty flat. So basically, this means that more users do not equal to more insight. 5 users is generally enough to get you the most insight for usability problems. Because again, it's not about opinions, it's about behaviors, right? So what we say with behaviors, if you see one person doing something, it's an anecdote. If you see 2 people doing something, it's a coincidence. If you see 3 people doing something, it's a trend. And user research is about that. It's about trends. Equally, design, again, it's not like opinions. If I were to change the door handle on that door, and I would see a few of you going through that door, very quickly we can see whether that door handle works or not. If we change it, we can very quickly see the effects it has, right? But one really striking truth for me about this graph also is 0 users gives us 0 insight. So testing is always a good idea. So asking the right questions. So there's, as I mentioned before, a real art to asking good questions. Ask the wrong question or a bad question, and you end up getting bad insight. So bad questions are those that are leading, loaded, or hypothetical. So hence the leading photo. I'm not sure how good that is. So what makes a leading question? A leading question is an assumptive question. So one that includes an assumption about the outcome. For example, how late do you think the item will be delivered? It's making an assumption something will be late, right? Or linking a personal point of view. Questions that clearly ask for an agreement. This one's so much better than that one, isn't it? You're going to be hard-pressed to say no to that. And then finally, a closed question, so something that ends up in a yes or no. There are certain situations where you can use them, but again, you need to know how to use them, when to use them, and there's a way that you can use them, so you always give the person an out. Right, we're going to play a little game. So, hands up if you think that this is a good question. Yay, no hands up. Well done. It's a terrible question. So it's terrible because it's assuming that the feature would be useful, and then it's also asking people to put themselves in a hypothetical situation. And as we talked about, people are very bad at projecting. They're very bad at putting themselves in a hypothetical situation, especially if they have no understanding really of the context of your product and the way that you're thinking of using it. This question, hands up if you think it's a good question. Tell me about a time when you were trying to send money to a friend. Yeah, it's a good question, right? So we're just asking someone about their experience, and we're going to try and understand how they went about doing it. Even better is we would see them trying to send money to their friend. We'd sit next to them and go, right, can you show me how you send money to your friend? And then we would, go through that with them. But in the absence of that, we ask them. Right, and then... Good question, hands up. Terrible question, again. So firstly, it really is not that simple. You can't just ask people what they want. And then finally, people, as we mentioned, they don't know what they want. There's this fake Henry Ford quote about horses that I've heard going around the houses for like the last 7 or 8 years. That is not actually something that Henry Ford said, just to clear that up. I can go to bed now and sleep well tonight. Yeah, people don't know what they want. Again, they don't have the context that we have. They don't understand necessarily a situation in the way that we do. They won't have spoken to lots of other people. So it's our job as designers, as product managers, as anyone really who works in tech to look at underlying needs, try to find common themes, and then address those needs with solutions, right? You can ask people what they want, but just always take it with a pinch of salt. So if you're showing someone a design, they're going through a task, and then they go, oh no, that's really confusing, can you change this label to X, Y, Z? You can, but really you'll probably know better what you should be changing it to based on what other people said, right? Or what they did, rather, not what they said. So if you're really stuck, but maybe you're working on your own in a company and you're needing to do your own user research and you just don't know where to start, these are 3 great questions to get you started. So what is it you're trying to get done? And unpick it with the 5 whys. So someone might go, I am trying to send money to someone, right? Why is it you're trying to send money to them? Oh, because we went to the restaurant and they ended up paying for me, right? Okay, why did they end up paying for you? Because you can see where this is going. So you just keep unpicking the problem until you really get to the core need. And then once you've got that, you can ask them, how is it you currently do that? And then again, hopefully they'll show you rather than just tell you. And then the last question, what could be better about how you're doing it? And that last one, again, it helps them get some of that stuff off their chest, but ultimately it's up to you, right, to try and decide what you can be doing better. And a few final closing tips. If you are going to be doing your own research, or if you're working with user researchers, please give them enough time. Trying to find the right sample and trying to find the right people is probably what takes the longest most of the time, especially if you're working on something that is super specific. If you're working on like a product or a service where your user base is really far away, or they're doing a behavior that is very unique, it can take so long to get to them. So really give yourselves enough time. The second one, get the right sample. I think that goes without saying, is super important. The third one, focusing on the behaviors and experiences, not opinions. If you go away with one thing and it's this tonight, I'll be really happy. Remember your biases. We're full of them. They all come, free with a copy of a human brain, so we can't really get rid of them. But if we are mindful of them and aware of them, we can try and work against them. And then finally, ask for help if you're unsure. There's a big user research community, and I'm sure people would be happy to help with the direction that you need to go in and how you can set that up properly. We're hiring, by the way. Design team is expanding. We've got everything from visual designers to product designers and user researchers. So if you'd like to find out more about how we do things, or if you'd like to be part of the journey, please come and join us. Otherwise, that's it from me. Any questions? Any questions? There's a mic over there, I think, that Richard's got.
Thanks, that was a great talk. Just had a question. Can you give us an example of? We always go into sort of designing or making a product with certain confirmation biases and assumptions about what we think are right. And product owners, developers, and everyone have these things, and it's hard to escape from them, except with your extensive sort of training and mindset on these things. Can you give us an example of something that you went in with a confirmation bias of what you thought the users are probably going to do, and you were really surprised to see the research reveal something completely different?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. So this happens actually a lot of the time, more than I would almost care to admit, with user testing. So really often we'll create a flow for a task, and I sort of look at it and I go, yeah, like this bit is really going to trip people up, and they'll sail through this bit, it'll be completely fine. And often that's not the case at all, which is why I think having that list is great, because then you can go back to it and be like, oh, actually we really got that one very wrong. And you can also almost get a little bit of quant behind the qual by seeing some of the numbers in a really sort of short and sharp way. Yeah, I don't know if that's a little bit waffly, but...
I was more thinking about a specific example of something that you thought might work in the Monzo app, and then you found, oh no, that's crap, doesn't work.
To be honest, it happens so much I almost don't remember them, which is really bad, but good in a way.
Hi. So you mentioned that you try to include the project team as part of the user research, but at the same time, you look at both explorative and evaluative. So at what point do you begin to include the project team as part of the user research?
Ideally, it's as soon as possible. So one of the things that I've tried to do with our product managers is I try and catch up with them as regularly as I can. And I also am part of all of the different teams, basically, in Slack. So I can see what's coming up. And I also sit in the product council. So as soon as there's anything that's coming up that I'm likely to know is going to need research support, I'm there. And it's also part of a team. The reason why I'm needing to bring on some more people to help, because I just can't do it by myself anymore, really. In terms of getting them involved, so I will try and keep an eye out for what might be happening. And then the second that we're talking about any direction that we might want to go in, that's when we start looking at what we might need to do. I'd like to get to a place where we can do it proactively, so where we've already got some explorative research that's going out. So if we know, for example, like lending is a really good example, if we know that we're looking at lending features, let's just go out and do lots of explorative research on that, which I haven't really had the chance to do yet. Or if one of the next things that we're going to be doing is Monzo with friends, let's try and understand some of the challenges that people have around sharing money with their friends, splitting money with their friends, and all those different use cases, right? So if that's happening as early as possible is sort of the short answer to that. Yeah.
And which stakeholders do you try to get involved? Is it just user research and product teams, or do you also include the developers as well as part of the research that you're doing in the first place, like exploratory research?
Yeah, I try and involve everyone. So with exploratory research, it's generally more the product managers than the designers initially, but then as soon as we start having a look at concepts and coming up with ideas, the developers need to be there as well, because they can give us guidance as to what is technically feasible or not. With the user testing, they have to be there, because if we start seeing, changes that require, additional work basically that they're going to need to do, rather than designers just taking that and then creating something that they can't build, they need to be there to tell us what's feasible. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. First of all, thank you for the presentation. It was really, really good. Actually, I have two questions for the price of one. First question is, when you do the user research, you saw the picture, you saw you're doing that remotely and the rest of the team is in another room. Does the user, is he aware, or is he aware that there is another group of people watching into the research?
Are they aware?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Short answer.
Okay.
I think some of them, they might assume that they might be, but generally no. So I have seen setups where you get labs that have a one-way mirror, to me they're no good. The one-way mirrors, you can always tell that there's someone watching. Most people are on their MacBooks, so you just get this weird halo around their faces, ghosts of Christmas past. And then it's true, it looks really weird if you ever get a chance to see it. And then with the one-way mirror, it just means that you don't really focus on their faces, because they're either facing the mirror, which makes them feel uncomfortable, or they've got their backs to the mirror, in which case you can't see their faces. So I tend to stream, and I tend to have the two rooms fairly far away from each other, so most people just don't suspect it.
Okay, that's fine. And the other question is, I would like to know a bit more about the profile of the users. You are, in terms when they use research, if they are engaged customers, or maybe users that they are not really active now with Monzo, or they drop, or if you are going just for people that they don't know anything about Monzo.
Yeah, so it depends on the feature that we're testing. With the testing Tuesdays, I always try and make sure we've got a 50-50 split, so that we make sure that we're also testing usability more than anything. Because most Monzo customers will be used to the way that the app works, and will be used to where they can find things, right? Whereas if we bring in people who are completely naive to Monzo, then they won't know where to necessarily look for stuff, so we sort of get a fresh look on it every time. And I kind of feel like from a usability perspective, if we can meet their needs, then we're doing pretty well.
Thank you.
You've talked a lot about qualitative research. Do you do any kind of quantitative, like maybe A/B testing, or do you maybe just look at the app analytics and maybe some numbers, with people successfully completed certain tasks, and is that kind of a substitute for quantitative testing?
Yeah, we do tons of A/B testing, absolutely tons of it. We've got our data team and then one of our product managers who are basically running experiments all the time. I don't really tend to get involved in those because those are a lot further down the line, and those for us are more, around like smaller changes. As I said, I don't really do much to do with that. For me, like the bulk of my work is more around the qualitative, or if we are going to do quantitative, it's more around surveys.
Hi. How do you recruit new users, like people that don't use Monzo app? Any tips, obviously, on where to find users, basically?
Yeah, there's a few different ways. We use a third-party recruiter that specializes in finding people for this. They have a really large pool of people, and then we work with them to write what we call a recruitment screener, so a certain profile we're looking for. They get sent like a survey, and then based on their answers, they either get filtered in or out. There's lots of other ways that you can do it. I've done it in the past when I was working somewhere like low budget, using Gumtree. You can pay for advertising in newspapers. There's lots of different ways, but I think if you're really struggling for budget, then rather than bringing people in, try and go to them. So do pop-up testing, and that way you can also bring someone with you, and it just gets them out the office a bit. And I find that way, you just get back into that pool a bit more.
So how do you evaluate your engagement on the app, or mostly the way that people use the card? Which one is more valuable for you guys, the app or the card?
What do you mean, sorry?
So I have a similar project for a sport club, and they have a card. And the old people, above 30 people, they have a problem with engaging with the app, or because they don't know technology. So for us, experience is more important. We're using the card without them using the app.
Mm-hmm.
But in your case, which one is more evaluated, the card or the app?
It's not about that. It's not about the card or the app. It's about what are the problems that we're trying to solve for people, and what is it that they're trying to do? What are the tasks that they are wanting to do? So for us, it's not really about that. It's about what people are telling us works for them, what doesn't work for them, and how we solve for that. I think if you're talking about business metrics...
No, because, so I'll give you an example. So our app can actually, like you said, share and do anything like that, but you can do that with a simple card, because it's NFC technology.
Mm-hmm.
So we can transfer now between cards without actually doing anything with apps. It's possible. So you can do share with friends without even having an app. We can do that now. We're doing that now. So that's why I'm actually, how do you validate your engagement? Do you validate more on the way you gather your people? Because you can actually get data even from from the card to see how much people use the card instead of using the app. So which one do you value more? That's what I'm saying.
I think maybe let's talk about it later so I can have a look at the way that your product's working. For me personally, I could give an answer, but I'm not sure that would be representative of everyone else. And I think, again, it comes back down to what you're trying to measure with it. Like engagement as a metric, personally, I don't feel is that informative. I feel like there's other things that you can be measuring that will really get to what it is that you're trying to find out. But yeah, let's talk about it later.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I know you showed the Trello board and your Slack bot that pulls some of your insights, but I'm really intrigued about how you ensure that the insights that you gather make their way into the actual product and don't kind of get lost along the way and don't, actually sort of reach the kind of design and development stage.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we're really lucky that we've got some fantastic product managers at Monzo, and one of the things that, I don't know how they do it, but they just seem to know, they have a very clear vision of what they want to do, of how they want to get there, and they've got a very clear vision of what needs to happen, after the next. In terms of making sure the insight doesn't get lost, there's the Confluence page that I'll refer back to. And then because I'm checking in with the product managers also, I can get a sense of where they're going with things. We do document everything in like release trains on Confluence so we can see what's coming up. And they've also got a massive backlog with any of like the big bugs and things and fixes that are there. So I can cross-reference with what it is I'm learning, what it is I have learned, and then also make sure I close the loop with them to see if there's anything that's missing. I do check in with them. So after we've done also like some research, I don't just sort of put it on Confluence and leave it. I will have playback sessions. And one of the tips I'd give with the playback sessions is rather than doing like a monolith of all of the issues and creating these like 50-page PowerPoints, which I've seen a lot, try and actually keep them more high level and really make them more individualized to all the different product managers so that way you can give them the high level, but then they almost you have to have a discussion with them about how you go into more detail. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. That sounds like a really good process.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
No worries.
Hi, I'm here. So you mentioned that you have handpicked 14 users for one of your feature testing. So just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on how, is there any particular approach that you adopt to pick these 14 people to ensure that they are representative of the entire user group? And a related question would be, so some users may be very active, but they are not necessarily the most profitable users. Would you bake these into your like research or testing into kind of as a consideration?
Cool, yeah, so question number one, how did we handpick them? Was that the question?
Yeah.
So it was really to make sure that they were as representative. So we used a screener. So there was a few things like profile sort of areas that I wanted to make sure that we covered off. So things that I knew might be relevant, right? So in this case, when we were looking at spending or the summary, I wanted to make sure that we weren't just getting people who are paid on the monthly cycle. We wanted to get freelancers. We wanted to get people who didn't have any income. So people who were retired or people who were students. So we're really getting as many people who cover all of those different types of usages, right? Does that answer question number one?
Yeah, I mean, like, so, but you would came in with an assumption of, I guess, like students. Okay, so that's my criteria. Or is there any, I don't know, like, in the academic kind of research space where you would have like a very good a breakdown of demographic like categories that you would usually use as a reference when you kind of pick people?
It comes back down to usage for me and behaviors. So rather than it being demographics, is like what are the different groups of people around the behaviors that we want to try and see and emulate. So when it comes to spending or when it comes to income, trying to understand or trying to see what all those different ones might be. Yeah. And the second question, sorry.
So some users may be very active in using the app, or certain features, but they are not necessarily the most profitable users. So when you kind of conduct research, would you kind of put more bias on like more profitable type of like users?
The short answer is no. Monzo, like one of the things that we're really big on is trying to make inclusive design and trying to design a product that everyone can use. I remember reading a stat recently. There's a very high number of people, I can't remember the exact number and I don't want to make it up, but there's a lot of people who are unbanked, and that is something that we really want to try and bring banking to everyone, right? So people who are in debt, refugees, like people who have only just moved to the UK, like some of them really struggle to get a bank account, and that's something that we want to change. And actually, I was just having a conversation with Lou, who I think is in the audience just now, before coming on here, about how we can start understanding the needs of those groups of people. And right now, like this week, might not be a priority because my bandwidth is a bit stretched. But as soon as we can start doing it, as soon as Monzo starts becoming a bit more profitable, hopefully very soon, we'll be able to focus on that.
Well, thank you.
Okay, I think we've got time for two more, okay?
Hi. I just wanted for maybe some reflections on what it's like to be doing your job at a company like Monzo, which is big on transparency and it's big on community, compared to a company that isn't. I mean, I'll give you an example. 95% of your users might be, screaming and saying, we really want to have Apple Pay, we really want to have Apple Pay. Whereas almost, as you said in the answer to the last question, 75% of the they don't have an iPhone, and of those, a massive portion don't care or know what Apple Pay is.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's something that we struggle with quite a lot in terms of we recognise that a lot of our users are super users in a way, right? They are affluent, they work in technology, they mostly live in London, they are very comfortable, they mostly have iPhones, right? And we recognise that. But at the same time, as you said, there's all these other needs. So how do we balance that? Well, there's part of it is understanding what are the needs that we need to keep our community happy with, right? So what are fundamental things that we just need to make sure we get done? And then what are other things that are part of that bigger vision? And then we try and balance them out. I think like the exercise I was showing you where we looked at all the different sources of feedback, that really helped, and that really helped us get like a ranking of all the things that we feel are essential banking features or essential things that we need to do to make sure that we keep our most engaged users happy, and then other things that go towards the direction that we want to go in.
Is that different because of the transparency in the community, or would you just be doing that if you were in a big old boring bank?
I think the big difference between here and other places I've worked at is just the way that people think about the direction we want to go in. I've been in so many meetings where we've gone, well, we could do this thing that isn't that great for users, or it's an okay experience for users and it would make us loads of money, or we can be super transparent about what we're doing and we're not going to be making money on it at all, but it's the right thing that we'd want to do. Like if we were designing it for us, which we kind of are, or we are actually, we wouldn't want that last thing to happen because it would just be a bit of a dick move. So we just try and not make those last things happen at all. Yeah.
Last question from the middle, I think.
So you spoke about a lot about bias, and then you got your developer and project team involved in your user research. Culturally, how do you make sure that the bias doesn't come into work? Because you have a vision, and the vision you spoke about getting bank accounts to people who are not banking. How do you make sure that culturally that bias doesn't come into picture?
I think there's always going to be a bit of bias. I think it's inevitable. But I think the more you're aware of it and the more you can see it happening, then that kind of helps. And fundamentally, that's kind of the most that you can do.
Do you do something to make your colleagues aware of the bias? Do you have activities where you sit down together and think that, oh, actually, that's not really point out, but then actually sit down and talk about it, saying that this is actually not something which is needed, but something which is biased towards one of the colleagues? I think so. So I've been running some workshops at Monzo with product managers, with the designers, and then I'm soon going to start doing it with the engineers about informing them about biases. So kind of what we did here, but it's a 2-hour workshop, so they don't get a choice. I'm going to sit you down and tell you how you think. So there's a bit of that, and then also when we're going through doing designs, and when people are making statements, when they're going, well, users think like this, or people do this. There's always a bit of challenge, right? And some people are better at it than others. Some people go, I'm making an assumption that. But some people like to go, well, I know that this. And we go, well, how did you know that? Well, I saw it on this one thing. Right, okay, well, is there one example or do you have other examples? So I think we're quite good. We've got a really good culture, I think, at challenging in a nice way and at being able to let everyone learn from other people. Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, do we have time for one very last question?
Hiya. Just wondering how it is you prioritize what you're going to test. There must be a lot of things that you want to test, so.
Yes, lots of things. So we prioritize them on our quarterly goals and our business goals. So we have 3 clear goals that we need to get done for the quarter, and anything that is working on a product that is not going towards those goals at the moment is getting deprioritized. So, for example, salaried accounts is a really important thing for us, as well as trying to make sure that some of the big new features like summary work properly. So anything that is working towards those, we will test and we will put more resource into.
Thank you.
That's all we've got.
Thank you.
Cool, thanks for coming. Sam will be sticking around afterwards if you have any more follow-up questions. Thanks for coming. See you at the next one. Cheers.